Good morning, everyone. It's your host, Dre, back with another one. And I want to talk about the buzzword of the last few weeks, which has been DEI. There's a conversation definitely to be had about the merits of DEI and also about its failings and shortcomings. I think my take is one that may be a little bit different than the conventional arguments that are out there because there are a lot of folks who they seem to want to make DEI a black issue. And honestly, it's kind of not. The majority of the benefits of DEI in terms of positions, hiring initiatives, so on and so forth, tend to go to white women, first and foremost. And after that, white men, ironically enough. And then you have a small single digit march of different various peoples of color. Asians make up about 8% of DEI, those in DEI positions. Then you have Hispanics, blacks, which comprise just under 4%. So, if nearly 80% is going to white men and women, why are we talking about DEI like it's a black issue? The biggest thing for me is simply this. I feel that DEI, at least as I've seen it implemented at the companies I've been at, it definitely fails black men and women, but especially black men. And the biggest thing we have to talk about is that the majority of the people here, the majority that get the benefits of DEI are white women. And in a lot of ways, these white women are shaping the hiring initiatives and the cultural environment of these offices. And, there's a lot of quote unquote bias training that goes on. But at the end of the day, when you look around, after those bias trainings and so on and so forth, does your office really look that much different? Like, don't get me wrong. I've worked at some places where it's definitely been diverse at a entry level position type of level. But oftentimes when you go up just a run or two on the organization's ladder, you start to become very white very quickly. And that's my biggest problem with DEI. As a black man, I'll be frank, some of the aims of DEI are very appealing. Having an equitable um, environment for you to work in, having a place where you can show up as your authentic self. Those are things that are all very appealing. I'll be honest. I'm a guy who typically wears suit and tie into the office. And every now and then, just throwing on some jeans, a t-shirt, and my Cuban link would be quite convenient. But I also know the perceptions that come along with that. Hell, I know the perceptions about me that come along even without that. So DEI aiming to create these equitable environments, yes, it's something I very much agree with. But I feel DEI was always doomed to fail, especially when you include white women who are the largest demographic, by the way, in the United States. When you include them as a minority and have these efforts to push them into a lot of key prominent positions that are able to influence hiring, able to influence promotional decisions, to me, those numbers start to make a whole lot of sense why the majority of DEI is white folks. They're the majority populace here. And you're talking about something that ultimately, counter to what a lot of people may think, DEI doesn't have quotas. Some organizations may have certain benchmarks that they're pushing for, but there's not an enforceable quota per se in the way that you would think of it. Like, hey, we have to hire X amount of people of this particular background and race. What often happens is these companies have their own internal benchmarks, which they set in order to try to accurately, I guess you would say, reflect the communities that they work in. Those work to, as I said before, somewhat varying degrees. Just to share a little bit about my experience with DEI, as a black man who's worked in some pretty large corporations, it's been maddening. I have literally sat in 3 DEI meetings where almost verbatim the same exact line gets said. There's demographic information that gets posted on the screen, and that demographic information basically says something to the effect of, we have a majority of women working here at the company. I believe the lowest was back in 2015, the company I was at, to performance. But basically it was like, hey, we're a majority women, and we feel diversity means hiring more women. And it's kind of like, oh, okay. And pretty much everything that's talked about is about women and other people of color. And as a black guy, you're kind of sitting there and looking around. You like look to your left, look to your right. They pretty much talk about initiatives to be more equitable in hiring Hispanic and black women, but it's like men are invisible. And it's really interesting because there's a phenomenon in general with black men in corporate that I like to call hypervisibility. I feel that anytime you have a black man in prominent positions, especially those of leaderships within corporate environments, which are predominantly white, that you go under this hyper scrutinous microscope. And it has been my experience that, hey, maybe you showed up and you're a little groggy. Maybe you, were a little too straightforward and to the point. Hell, maybe you just wore something that, you were a little bit adventurous and it didn't really land. Every single little thing is under the microscope and comes up in one-on-ones, especially when your manager doesn't understand you. As a black man who's been in his career for nearly 12 years, I've only been managed ever in my career by straight black men twice. In fact, I've only been managed by black men in my career 3 times. And the last time was not one of the best times. So lifestyles and backgrounds and ethnicities, they do matter. But when you create an environment that is geared, at pushing certain scales in one direction or another, I do feel there has to be some forethought and accountability in how these things are messaged, how these things are enacted, what it means for marginalized groups that never quite got any type of restitution. Field Order 15. Oh, whoops. If you know, you know. There's a complete lack of understanding of black men, what we as black men need in order to be able to come into those types of environments, thrive, and make the impacts that would allow us to be the organizational assets. And frankly, DEI just kind of, to me, whenever I hear DEI, I really think it's another face of white supremacy. And I know how that's gonna sound, especially coming from a black dude, especially coming from somebody who's supposed to be a leftist and all this other stuff. But honestly, looking at the demographics of it, I mean, it's kind of hard to deny. There are those who would say that DEI has benefited black women, and to some degree, I would say that's true, but more often than not, it has completely screwed black people, both black men and black women, with black men getting the shittiest end of the stick. So for me, in particular, when it comes down to the whole DEI argument, and you know, especially with a lot of the rhetoric as of late with these various plane crashes and such, you want to say it's a DEI hire? Cool, go right ahead. You're talking about yourself. You're slandering yourself and you don't even know it. Especially when you're talking about we're going to take the benefits of DEI and redistribute it back to those who were affected by it. Did Trump, you know, if thinking about this shit, in a way, Trump just said he about to do reparations. It's just not gonna go to who the fuck he thinks it is if he follows through with it. God damn, ain't that rich? But I guess to kind of bring this all together and land its plane, on my social media feeds, I see a lot of black folks up in arms about DEI. I get it. Like I said, even though I feel that DEI largely hasn't benefited black men, there are some aspects that I can rock with. Overall, though, I guess you would say, indifferent. It's a system that doesn't benefit us. It's borne out in the numbers. If it did benefit us, don't you think other people would be talking about it? Don't you think politicians would have been campaigning on these things? Don't you think somebody would have been screaming it from the rooftop? But the reality is, it's done what it's always done, what similar programs have always done, which is they find a way to otherize parts of the majority populace and funnel benefits to them. I mean, the ever expansive lifestyle that ends with the plus is kind of an example of that. I personally know some folks who are polygamous. Their relationships are heterosexual. However, if you want to go by all the letters of that spectrum, they technically would be included in that spectrum. And I can tell you, they would highly disagree with that. They are actually anti that. Hey, yo, added intro here. So I realized I didn't quite fully get that thought out in the way that I was envisioning it in my head. Essentially, what I was trying to say was, through the expansion of alternative lifestyles, you have a lot of groups that are able to claim to be a part of it and, you know, get some of the benefits that are supposed to go for marginalized people. For instance, Mormons are kind of known for having multiple wives, and along with the whole Golden Tablets, Joseph Smith thing. But that's another thing. But in that instance, they would be classified as polygamous, which is part of LGBTQ. Believe it or not, even though they're having heterosexual relationships, even though they would say that, most probably would say that they're anti-gay or anti-trans, yet they would be lumped into the same smorgasbord as those individuals. And if they wanted to, they could definitely claim it. So that is part of how the majority has otherized themselves. This is being in the terms of white men. This is part of how they have successfully otherized themselves and been able to claim benefits that weren't initially intended for them. So I'll probably edit that whole little thing out, or I might leave it in. I don't know. But that's what I was trying to say. That's what I was trying to articulate. Said it in my head, just didn't quite connect to the lips for whatever reason. But peace. When it comes down to DEI and black folks, I feel it's a fight that isn't our fight. And if we really want to endeavor anything about DEI, I would say simply this. Any DEI initiatives that is not paired with enforceable quotas, you're just going to get the same thing. At the end of the day, to have a initiative that is supposed to rectify harms and injustices against harmed populaces such as black men and women who have been screwed in ways that most people will never know or even think of. Most people don't know that black people prior to the 60s, a lot of people who sharecropped, for instance, or even did labor in general in the South, could not freely change jobs. That their labor was done on a year-to-year basis in which they signed contracts, which if they broke was a jailable offense that could basically lead to them to becoming from virtual slaves to outright slaves via the 13th. A lot of people don't know about peonage and how a lot of the laws that we have today, such as loitering and vagrancy and so on and so forth, basically were enacted in order to criminalize black people and to criminalize the black condition so that they could be incarcerated and compelled for free labor. A lot of people don't realize that even after slavery, how pernicious the segregation and the Jim Crow era really was, especially for those like myself that came from certain parts of the Deep South. I know there's a lot of folks who feel like their families were poor and didn't have anything. And I'm not going to go back at that and say, hey, no. But what I am saying is your quote unquote nothing was a whole lot of something for a black family. They were stories that my grandfather told me, how tools were provided for white guys at the mill. But black folks either had to bring their own tools or they could get tools and it'd be taken out of their check. So, once again, DEI, very noble aim. And if you do not have quotas, such a thing is just that it is a noble aim with a flawed implementation that will just end up exacerbating the gaps that we already have today. So, I'm saving my powder for another fight. I don't think that's the fight black folks need to be making. I think we need to be coming together, collaborating, building our own institutions and infrastructure, and devising ways to defend it against the inevitable attacks that will come physical and legally. That's my opinion. But share yours down below in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Peace. I'm out.